By the time the fog crawled up from the harbor and pressed its face against the windows of the Gravesend Institute, I was already regretting signing up for surgical materials practicum. 4 hours, Professor Ezra Blackwood said, chalk tapping against the slate. You will forge a functional scalpel capable of making a clean incision through preserved tissue without disturbing the binding sigils beneath. Steel alloy only. Nothing exotic. Nothing clever. His gaze swept the lab, gleaming metal tables, jars of cloudy preservatives, the faint reek of formalin mixing with salt air from Gloom Harbor outside. We all nodded. Simple. Controlled. Safe. Then Aria Cole raised her hand. She sat in the back row, as far from the professor as possible, tucked under a flickering surgical lamp that made the shadows under her eyes look like bruises. Her hair was tied back with a strip of gauze, already stained. "Professor Blackwood," she said, voice steady, "are we limited to metal?" The room tightened. Someone's beaker clinked too hard against glass. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "This is a metallurgical assessment, Miss Cole." "Yes," she said, brightening. "But the syllabus says surgical materials. And the assignment sheet only says, forge a scalpel that can cut cleanly. It doesn't actually say metal anywhere." She held up the printed sheet. She wasn't wrong. A low murmur rippled around the lab. I stared down at my own copy. No mention of metal. Just functional, precise, clean. I raised my hand before I could stop myself. "Sir, there are safety guidelines about organic materials." "I'm aware of the safety guidelines, Mr. Ward," Blackwood said, not looking away from Aria. "What exactly did you have in mind?" "Bone," she said simply. The word landed like a dropped instrument. "In the early days of surgery," she continued, warming to her subject, "before refined steels, some cultures sharpened bone to a near microscopic edge. With the right treatment, calcium phosphate can be—" "No!" Blackwood's voice cut across hers. "You will use the provided alloys like everyone else." "But it's not prohibited," Aria said. No defiance, just cool logic. "And we have an entire morgue downstairs full of unclaimed bodies. It's efficient, ethical, even, if you think about it." The back of my neck prickled. Blackwood pinched the bridge of his nose. For a moment he just stood there, the overhead lights turning the silver at his temples into a pale halo. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired. "Fine. 1 bone scalpel. If it fails, you redo the assignment in steel. If it violates any safety protocol, I fail you on the spot. Understood?" Aria smiled. Too many teeth. "Perfectly. I shouldn't have followed her to the morgue, but curiosity has longer fingers than fear." The air downstairs was colder, heavier. Rows of steel drawers lined the walls, each with a white toe tag hanging like a mute accusation. Aria moved between them with unsettling familiarity, flipping tags, humming under her breath. "Unclaimed," she murmured. "Unidentified. Oh, you'll do." She slid open a drawer. I saw only a pale leg, a glimpse of cloth. She removed a femur with clinical care, as if this were no different from checking out a textbook. As she turned away, my gaze snagged on the toe tag. No name. Male. Found near docks. As I watched, the ink on "no name" bled outward, the letters blurring until they were just a gray smear. I blinked hard. When my vision cleared, the tag looked normal again. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" Aria said, already halfway to the door, bone cradled in her arms like a relic. Back in the lab, the smell changed. The others heated steel in controlled blue-white flames. Aria set up her own station, a tall glass cylinder filled with a cloudy solution of chemicals and something darker that clung to the sides in slow, viscous streaks. "Decalcifying agents, stabilizers," she said when she caught me staring. "Encourages a tighter crystal lattice. You'll like it. It's very efficient." She lowered the femur into the bath. Bubbles rose, bursting with a faint hiss. The overhead lights dimmed for a heartbeat. And somewhere, too close to my ear to be anyone in the room, I heard a cluster of voices layered together, no louder than breath. At last! I spun around. Everyone else was busy at their forges, faces flushed, focused. No one had spoken. When the timer chimed an hour later, Arya drew the bone out. It no longer looked like bone. It was a milky, translucent length of something between ceramic and glass, humming faintly in my teeth more than my ears. She cut, carved, and ground in near silence. Each stroke seemed to sharpen the air itself. The finished scalpel lay on the tray, narrow and pale, edge so thin it almost disappeared when turned sideways. For the practical test, Blackwood laid a slab of preserved tissue over a web of faintly glowing sigils. "One clean incision," he said. Arya didn't flourish. She simply drew the blade through. No drag, no resistance. The tissue parted soundlessly, the underlying sigils untouched, their lines even clearer than before, as if the cut had polished them. The room was dead quiet. Blackwood reached for the scalpel. The moment his fingertips brushed the handle, he froze. His pupils dilated. The color drained from his face. "Professor?" I asked. He dropped the scalpel as if it burned. "Full marks," he said hoarsely. "Clean up. Class dismissed." As we filed out, I looked back once. The bone scalpel lay alone in the stainless steel tray, catching the light in a way that made my skin crawl. For a fraction of a second, in its reflection, I thought I saw not one face but many, crowded together, mouths moving in noiseless, hungry prayer. And again, just for me, "Thank you." I tried to pretend the bone scalpel was just another tool. For the rest of the week, it stayed locked in a glass-front cabinet in Lab 3, sitting politely among steel instruments that suddenly looked crude by comparison. No one talked about what happened when Professor Blackwood touched it. We didn't have to. The way he avoided looking at that cabinet was enough. By Friday, the syllabus had a new addendum. Effective immediately, use of organic materials, bone, cartilage, keratin, or unidentified tissues is prohibited in practical assessments unless explicitly authorized. Someone had taped it crookedly to the notice board. Beneath the line about organic materials, someone else had penciled in, "Except for Miss Cole, apparently." No one claimed the handwriting, but when Arya saw it, she only smiled. "That's progress," she said. "They don't bother adding rules for things that don't scare them." I didn't mean to follow her that night. I'd stayed late in the library, annotating trauma case reports until the text blurred. When I finally headed downstairs, the hallway outside the morgue was dim, lit only by a sputtering emergency strip. A sliver of light leaked out from under the morgue door. Technically, students weren't allowed down there after hours. Technically, I turned the handle anyway. Cold hit me first. Not the normal morgue chill, but something damp and heavy that clung to my lungs. The overhead lights were off. Only the autopsy lamps over 2 central tables burned, pools of harsh white in a sea of shadow. Arya stood under one of them. The bone scalpel gleamed in her hand, narrow and colorless. Drinking in the light, on the table in front of her, lay a skull already cleaned of flesh, sutures faintly visible like pale rivers. She was carving. Not random scratches, delicate lines, curls, symbols I recognized from binding sigils and circulatory charts, stitched together in patterns that made my head ache if I tried to follow them. "Arya," I said. She didn't start, just glanced up, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion and something like exhilaration. "You shouldn't be here, Ethan," she said. "Officially, I mean. Unofficially, I'm glad you are." "That's a skull," I said, brilliantly observant. "From who?" "Unclaimed." She shrugged. "Filed as no name, like half the drawers down here." My gaze slid to the nearest cold chamber. A toe tag dangled from the handle. Unknown. Male. No family contact. As I watched, condensation leaked down the stainless steel door, tracing over the letters. For a heartbeat, the water made new words. Let us stay useful. I blinked, and it was just moisture again. I'm not raising them, Arya said, as if she'd heard my thoughts. I'm listening. There's a difference. Listening to what? I asked. She tapped the scalpel lightly against the skull. The sound rang sharper than it should have, like glass being flicked. The ones nobody claimed, she said softly. We cut them, drain them, burn them, study them. Then we throw them away. But matter remembers. Structures remember. We're standing on top of a century of unspoken memory, Ethan. Doesn't it bother you nobody ever asked what they wanted? Before I could answer, the room shifted. Not visibly, just pressure. Like the air thickened. The hairs along my arms stood up. From somewhere between the walls and the floor and the steel drawers, a murmur rose. Not a single voice. A cluster. A crowd. Cole, left. Again? Use us. The words were disjointed, overlapping, but all carried the same tired yearning. The surgical lamps flickered. In their brief dimming, the morgue was lit instead by a faint, sourceless glow that seemed to seep from the metal of the tables, the drawers, the bone itself. I swallowed. You hear that? Arya's expression went distant for a second, like she was listening to music too quiet for me. Then she smiled, small and strangely gentle. They're louder now, she said. The scalpel opened a door. Not all the way, just enough. Enough for what? Enough to ask, she said. Enough to bargain. They don't want resurrection. They want purpose. To be part of something other than rot. Her hand moved again, scalpel etching another impossibly fine line into the bone. The metal tray beneath the skull vibrated faintly, singing a note so high it was almost beyond hearing. I forced myself to step closer. Up close, the carved channels weren't random at all. They flowed like vessels, like circuitry, like a map. Purpose, I repeated. And what do you get out of it? Arya looked up at me through the stark white light, shadows burning around her eyes. Material, she said, and a choir that answers when I call. Behind us, one of the steel drawers rattled, just once, like something inside had shifted closer to the door. The toe tags hanging from the nearest row swayed, though there was no draft. And under it all, like breath against the back of my neck, the voices whispered in layered harmony. Don't leave us down here, alone, again. The announcement came on a Monday, which felt unfair. Mondays were for minor anxieties, not life-altering ones. Professor Blackwood stood at the front of the lecture hall, hands folded behind his back, coat still smelling faintly of preservative and smoke. Your final assessment in surgical materials, he said, is as follows. Create a functional protective application, something that preserves life. A ward, a barrier, a shield. You may work in pairs. He clicked the projector. Rubric, parameters, safety clauses, the usual. Remember, he added, eyes lingering on the back row where Arya sat. This institute trains healers, not weaponsmiths. I expect your projects to reflect that. My notebook already had a plan. Enhanced suturing filament with better tensile strength and spell conduction. Boring, safe, guaranteed to pass. I'd barely finished the outline when a folded scrap of paper slid onto my desk. Don't commit yet. I have a better idea. Of course she did. She cornered me in Lab 7 that evening, the advanced lab tucked away behind 2 locked doors and a sign that said authorized personnel only. Don't worry, she said when I hesitated at the threshold. We're almost authorized. That's not how authorization works, I said, but followed her in. Lab 7 was bigger than our student rooms, quieter than the main morgue. Fewer metal drawers, more reinforced glass tanks and heavy workbenches. The air was cold, but not dead cold. Machines hummed softly, lights dimmed to a low clinical twilight. Aria hopped up to sit on one of the benches, swinging her feet like this was a cafe, not a restricted lab. "I want to build armor," she said. "Absolutely not," I replied. "Not that kind of armor, Ethan. Not spears and cannons and glorious battlefields." She wrinkled her nose. "I mean something dock workers could wear in the storm season. Something medics could use when they run into a collapsed building full of unstable glyphs." "Armor is still armor," I said. "You heard Blackwood. No weapons. It's not a weapon if it's meant to take hits, not deliver them." Her eyes gleamed. "A living barrier, light enough to wear all day, strong enough to laugh at shrapnel, cheap enough to make from what we already waste." "You mean from them?" I said quietly. Her smile faded into something more solemn. "From the ones who are already gone, yes. Bones and scraps and discarded wood. They have no names, no graves. We either burn them or chop them into practice pieces." Behind her, the glass of a storage cabinet reflected us both. For a heartbeat, there were more than 2 figures in the reflection, pale, indistinct shapes crowding just behind her shoulders. Faces blurred, heads bowed. I blinked, and they were just shelves again. "This isn't just about grades," Aria said. "Gloom Harbor chews people up. Fishermen, dock hands, smugglers, the kids who climb where they shouldn't. None of them can afford enchanted mail. What if we could make something better for the cost of a burial?" A low murmur rose under the bench. At first I thought it was machinery. Then the words separated. "Stand again. Hold the weight. Don't waste us." The nameless choir humming in the walls. "You hear them?" I said. "Of course I do." Her voice softened. "They want this, to be more than bags of parts." She slid off the bench and opened a side cabinet. Inside were trays of bone fragments, sorted by size. Another shelf held narrow strips of cured flesh. "Decellularized scaffolds," the label read. There was wood, too, thin sheets that had been soaked in alchemical baths until their grain shone like metal filaments. 3 layers, she said. Inner layer, flexible weave. Middle, bone composite, powdered, bound, patterned. Outer, treated wood, hard as ceramic but still able to flex. "You've already planned this," I said. "I've already started," she corrected. "I just need someone sane to tell me when I'm about to cross a line. Congratulations, you're my conscience." "I am not being listed as your You're my conscience," she repeated cheerfully. "Not my co-author." Silence stretched between us, filled with the faint ticking of cooling metal and the distant drip of some unseen pipe. The choir sighed in the floor. "Let us shield." I hated that it made sense. I hated that the idea of dock workers in cheap, strong armor didn't feel like horror. I hated that no matter how many ethics lectures I'd sat through, none of them had ever mentioned what to do when the dead asked. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like formalin. "I'll help, on one condition." Aria's eyes lit up. "Name it." "If this thing starts doing anything you can't explain, we stop. No bargaining. No one more test. We shut it down and tell Blackwood everything." Her smile dimmed slightly, but she nodded. "Deal." The lights flickered once, as if in acknowledgement. As we began laying out materials, bone powder in one tray, wood slats in another, strips of not-quite flesh in a third, the air in Lab 7 changed. Not colder, not warmer, just expectant. By the time we hung the first half-formed segment of armor on a steel stand, a crude torso piece woven with pale inner fibers, bone-laced middle, and dull wooden plates, it swayed slightly, though there was no draft. The metal frame rang with a faint, collective exhale. In my head, in the floor, in the glass, the nameless choir spoke in one clear, layered phrase. Let us stand between them and the blow. The first time the armor moved on its own, we pretended not to see it. It hung from a steel frame in Lab 7, a crude torso piece with overlapping plates of treated wood, a pale inner weave, and a bone-laced core that looked too much like fossilized marrow. The air around it always felt a little thicker, as if you had to push through an invisible curtain just to get close. Impact testing, Arya said, tightening her gloves. Low force first. Don't flinch. She raised a padded mallet and slammed it into the chest plate. The wood should have cracked. The inner weave should have stretched. Instead, the blow landed with a dull, unsatisfying thud. The armor dented, then slowly, unmistakably, eased back into shape, like flesh recovering from a bruise. The stand rocked backward, then steadied itself. See? Arya said, breathless. Distributed force. The bone lattice drank most of it. The choir hummed in the floor, in the walls, in the hollow rods of the stand. More. We escalated, weighted pendulum, blunt instruments, contained bursts of kinetic spellwork. Each time, the armor yielded just enough to suggest something alive, then restored itself with unnerving patience. After a focused concussion charm, faint lines appeared along one plate, hairline fractures spidering out from the point of impact. I reached for them, intending to note depth. Before my fingers touched, the cracks contracted and sealed. My tongue went dry. That shouldn't be possible without a catalyst. Arya made a note on her clipboard. It's possible with a distributed microbinding network and responsive material memory. Or with something deciding it doesn't want to stay broken, I muttered. The overhead lights flickered once in agreement. We needed a live subject. That was the part I hated most. Voluntary, supervised, within approved parameters, Arya recited as if that made it better. Low-risk spells only. The volunteer was a third-year named Jalen, broad-shouldered and too eager to impress for his own good. He grinned as we fastened the armor around his chest, the inner weave settling against his shirt with a soft, almost affectionate cling. Feels warm, he said, surprised. Like it's adjusting to me. Inner layer responds to body heat, Arya said. That's normal. Normal, right. We started with a mild force charm. The glowing glyph hit center mass, flared, and dispersed. Jalen only rocked back a step. Again, he said. We obeyed. Stronger this time, the armor absorbed it, wood darkening for a moment as if something underneath drank the energy, then returning to its usual muted tone. Any pain? I asked. No, Jalen said. He hesitated. But, is anyone else hearing that? My pen froze. Hearing what? He frowned, eyes unfocusing. It's like a crowd, really far away, saying my name. No, not my name. Just ours. The nameless choir pulsed up through the tiles. Hold, hold, don't let go. Arya stepped closer, hands hovering near the buckles. Any dizziness? Nausea? Tingling in your fingers? Jalen shook his head. Just hungry. Hungry how? I asked. He pressed a gloved hand against the breastplate. Not me. It. It wants more. Another hit. A chill slid down my spine. We're done. Arya's jaw tightened. We're at half the standard rating for commercial vests. One more. No, I said. This wasn't in the protocol. He's out. For a heartbeat, the room strained around us, stretched thin between my fear and her ambition. Then Arya exhaled. Fine. Off it comes. As we unbuckled the armor, the inner weave clung to Jalen's shirt like cobwebs, reluctant to let go. When the last strap loosened, he shivered, rubbing his arms. Temperature drop? I asked. He shook his head. No, just feels like walking out of a crowded room. Quiet. Too quiet. On the stand, the armor sagged for a moment, then straightened. A faint reddish sheen pulsed along the bone-laced seams. There, then gone. Not blood, not exactly. That night I dreamed of wearing it myself. In the dream, I stood at the edge of Gloom Harbor's old cemetery, fog pooling thick between leaning stones. The armor wrapped my chest like a second rib cage, heavy and comforting. Behind me, I felt them. Not seen, felt. Oppressive forms just beyond the edge of sight, dozens of presences crowding close, their whispers blending into a single, steady vow. We will take the blows. Just let us stand. When I woke, my shirt was damp with sweat, and there were faint pale impressions on my skin where the armor's inner weave would have touched. Finger-shaped, hand-shaped, like something had been holding on. They called it a review session, but everyone knew it was a trial. We were told to report to the North Wing Council Chamber at dusk. The North Wing sits directly above the oldest part of the Institute, the charnel vault where they keep what's left when even the morgue runs out of drawers. Bones ground to powder, ash in labeled urns, teeth in jars. You could feel it in the floor. When we entered, 7 members of the Ethics Council were already seated behind a long oak table. Dean Vorath Hale sat in the center, thin fingers steepled, eyes too sharp for the rest of his worn face. Professor Blackwood stood to one side, arms folded, expression unreadable. In the middle of the room, on a heavy iron stand, waited the armor. It looked more complete now, fully assembled. Breastplate, backplate, articulated shoulders. The treated wood had taken on a muted sheen, like polished bone. The inner weave peered out at the edges, pale as scar tissue. It was the only thing in the room that seemed awake. Mr. Ward, Miss Cole. Dean Hale's voice cut crisply through the hush. Thank you for coming. As if we'd had a choice. We took our places in front of the stand, close enough that I could see faint lines in the wood, grain or something more deliberate, forming almost runic whorls. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something older, like damp stone. You are here, Hale continued, because your project has raised questions, not only of safety, but of intent. His gaze flicked to Arya, and of consent. Arya clasped her hands behind her back, posture straight. We've complied with every written guideline, sir. Written guidelines, Hale repeated. Those are slow to catch up with whatever it is you're doing. A soft, humorless chuckle went around the table. Another council member, Dr. Renard, cleared her throat. We've received reports from your volunteer, she said, hearing voices while wearing the armor. Sensations of hunger. Her eyes glinted behind rimless spectacles. Care to explain? Arya didn't look at me, though I felt her wanting to. Responsive field resonance, she said. The inner weave and the bone composite hold residual impressions, not sentience. Echo. Under our feet, the floor vibrated, just once. I knew that pulse now. The choir, listening. And the source of those residual impressions? Hale asked. Cadaveric material, Arya said, no flinching. Unclaimed donors, processed and repurposed. We documented every extraction, no graves disturbed, no living subjects touched. Unclaimed, Hale echoed. No names, no advocates, no one to argue for them. The toe tags in the morgue flashed behind my eyes. No name, no family, for teaching. Wet ink sliding into new words. He leaned forward. Why bones, Miss Cole? Why not inert materials? There are a dozen mundane composites you could have used. Because inert materials can't do what this does, Arya answered quietly. Because every year dozens of people die in Gloom Harbor doing work that keeps this city alive. And when they die poor and alone, we turn them into practice cuts and lists of lesions. Her jaw clenched. This way, they stand between the living and the next falling beam, the next explosion, the next collapsing ward. A murmur passed through the council, less dismissive this time. Dr. Renard tapped her pen. You're arguing that this is honoring them. Yes, Arya said. We aren't forcing them to anything. We're giving structure to what's already there. The impressions, the echoes. She hesitated. They want to help. And how precisely? Hale said, voice suddenly sharp. Would you know what they want? The room went very still. The armor's wooden plates creaked softly, shifting imperceptibly on the stand. Not enough to blame on a draft. The pressure in the air spiked. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to three things: the iron stand, the weight of the building overhead, and the vast hollow underneath us where the Institute stored its forgotten dead. The choir rose through the stone. We remember. Cold. Cut. Burned. Scattered. Let us stand. One of the council members, a pale man from Forensic Charms, flinched. His hand tightened around the quill. Ink blotched across his notes. When he looked up, his eyes were no longer focusing on us, but on something far behind, far below. Do you hear that? He whispered. No one answered. We were all listening. The murmur swelled, layered voices echoing off oak and plaster, not loud, but everywhere. Then, without warning, Dr. Renard's body jerked once, like someone had pulled a thread through her spine. Her gaze snapped to the armor. Her pupils blew wide, swallowing the brown until only a thin ring remained. When she spoke, it was not her voice. It was many. We froze in the harbor, the voices said through her, overlapping, male and female and something between. We bled in the alleys. We burned in the wards. No stones, no names. We were cut and weighed and filed and thrown away. A pause, thick and ragged. Let us stand between them and the next blow. Let us do something. The words vibrated in my teeth. Arya's knuckles had gone white, but she didn't look afraid. She looked vindicated. Professor Blackwood, for once, looked nothing but old. Dr. Renard, Hale said sharply. She blinked. The tension snapped. Her shoulders slumped, quill dropping from nerveless fingers. She swallowed. What did I just say? No one rushed to answer. At last, Hale exhaled, long and slow. This is exactly the problem, he said. You've created something that blurs lines we are barely prepared to name, let alone regulate. He steepled his fingers again. But you have also created something that might save lives. His eyes found mine, then Arya's. That we cannot ignore either. He looked to Blackwood. Your assessment? Blackwood hesitated only a moment. It works, he said. And I haven't yet seen it harm anyone who didn't deserve to be afraid. That earned a few tight smiles. Hale nodded slowly. Here is our decision. Provisional approval. Arya's breath hitched. Provisional? You will not destroy it, Hale said. Yet, you will complete your research under direct supervision. No unsanctioned volunteers. No expansion of its consciousness. The word tasted wrong in his mouth. In 3 weeks' time, you will present your findings to the full faculty and selected external observers. If we are satisfied that this can be contained and governed, we will allow development to continue in tightly controlled contexts. And if you're not? I asked. Hale's eyes flicked to the floor, to the bones and ash and teeth we couldn't see. Then we lay it to rest, he said. Properly, this time. The armor creaked again, a slow settling of plates. The choir receded, thinning out until it was only a faint hum in my chest. Just before it faded entirely, a single strand of voice curled up like smoke and brushed the inside of my ear. 3 weeks, then. We can wait. We are good at that. They scheduled our presentation for mid-morning, but the sky over Gloom Harbor looked like evening. Low clouds, the color of old bruises, hanging heavy over the institute. The auditorium felt wrong with all the lights on. Students filled the lower rows in their gray coats. Professors clustered together like wary birds. At the very front sat the Ethics Council, and behind them a few strangers in darker suits, representatives from emergency services, I guessed, and maybe the ministry. On the stage, under a cone of light, stood the armor. It had never looked more complete. Arya had polished the outer plates until the treated wood shone like bone under skin. The inner weave nested just beneath the edges, pale and fibrous, hinting at muscles that weren't there. The bone lattice inside hummed quietly against my teeth whenever I got close. "Last chance to run," I muttered. Arya straightened my collar with brisk fingers. "If you bolt, I'm naming the armor Ethan out of spite." "That's not remotely a deterrent." She didn't smile. Her hands were shaking, just a little. Professor Blackwood appeared beside us, his presence as sudden and quiet as always. "Remember," he said, looking between us, "they want you to succeed. They just don't know it yet." "Comforting," I said. He glanced at the armor. "And they want you to succeed for their own reasons. Don't let either side use you without your consent." I couldn't tell if he meant the council or the dead. We'd argued for days about who would wear it. Arya insisted on volunteering. The council refused. "You're the architect," Hale had said. "We need you conscious if something goes wrong." So it fell to me, the designated conscience, the not quite co-author. On stage, the armor loomed taller than I remembered. As I approached, the inner weave seemed to stir, reaching slightly, like something smelling blood. Buckles clinked as Arya and Blackwood helped me into it. The inner layer was cool against my shirt at first, then warmed rapidly, clinging along my ribs, shoulders, spine. The bone lattice settled with the faintest of clicks, like vertebrae stacking into place. The world narrowed. Sound changed, not quieter, just filtered. The murmur of the auditorium faded to a distant sea. Under it, like a second heartbeat, the choir rose. "New host." "Steady." "Not yet." "You still with us, Mr. Ward?" Hale's voice carried from the front row. "Yes, sir," I said. My voice sounded a little deeper inside the helmless shell, resonating off plates that weren't metal. No discomfort, just aware. "Good," he said. "Proceed, Miss Cole." Arya stepped to the podium, notes in hand. On screen behind her, diagrams flared to life. Cross-sections of the armor, charts of stress tests, graphs of energy distribution. She clicked through them with clinical precision. "Our design," she said, "uses tripartite layering. Inner biowoven substrate for adaptability, central bone composite for distribution and memory, outer lignoceramic for impact resistance and environmental stability." She spoke language the council understood: tensile strength, cost per unit, comparative failure rates. But she also spoke mine. "And we've confirmed that the echo field remains non-autonomous. Responsive, yes. Sentient, no. It remembers pain. It does not plan it." The choir chuckled faintly in my chest at that. When she cued the first test footage, recordings of pendulums and spells slamming into the empty shell, there was the expected intake of breath, the low murmur of professional interest. Then she said, "Live demonstration," and the room went very still. The Forcecaster was a 4th year specializing in trauma magic, flanked by 2 supervisors and enough monitoring equipment to make the ministry comfortable. He stood at one end of the stage, palms glowing with caged kinetic energy. "Strength at level 3 to start," Blackwood said. "On my mark." "You sure about this?" the caster muttered. "No," I said honestly. Arya's eyes met mine across the stage. There was something there besides fear. Pride. Trust. Recklessness. "Ready," I said. Blackwood counted down. 3, 2, 1. The spell hit like being kicked by a horse made of air. For a fraction of a second, my ribs remembered what unarmored bodies feel like. Then the inner weave tightened, the bone lattice shivered, and the impact spread out across my chest in a wash of pressure and pins and needles. My boots slid back half an inch on the polished floor. I did not fall. The crowd exhaled as one. "Any pain?" I asked myself. No, just a lingering vibration where the spell had struck, radiating into the plates, then sinking deeper, elsewhere. The choir sang, jubilant and fierce. More. "Level 5, Hale said quietly. Arya hesitated, looking to Blackwood. He nodded. "We're here. We pull him if anything looks wrong." "Wrong," I muttered. "Define." But I found myself straightening, planting my feet more firmly. The armor felt tighter now, as if bracing with me. My heartbeat had synchronized with that second rhythm, the one that wasn't mine. "Do it," I said. The second blast slammed into the same spot. This time my vision white-outed for a blink. My shoulders snapped back. Somewhere deep in the armor, something groaned. A structural sound. Not quite bone. Not quite wood. Underneath, the choir roared. Not in pain. In triumph. We held. When the light cleared, the auditorium was utterly silent. Even breathing seemed impolite. "Mr. Ward?" Hale said. I took inventory. Ribs, tender, but intact. Lungs, working. Heart, racing, but for once, not just with fear. I looked down. The outer plates were darker in a spreading bloom where the spells had hit, the color of diluted blood soaking into grain. As I watched, the stain lightened, drawing inward, like a spill being sucked through a cloth. It wasn't vanishing. It was being kept. My voice came out rough. "I'm okay." The applause started tentatively from the students, like rain beginning. It spread as the faculty joined, except for the council, who merely exchanged significant looks. My knees wobbled when Arya and Blackwood unbuckled the armor. The moment it left my shoulders, the quiet rushed in, deafening. The choir receded, but not completely. A faint hum lingered at the edges of my hearing, like tinnitus shaped into vowels. "Good host. That's enough for today," Blackwood said sharply, clapping a hand on my shoulder when I swayed. "Hydrate before you fall over and ruin our data." The deliberation took hours. We weren't invited. We sat instead on a bench in the courtyard outside the north wing, where fog diluted the weak sunlight into a murky gray. The armor had been taken away to a side chamber for examination. I tried not to imagine a group of professors prodding it with instruments and getting whispered at. "Well," Arya said at last, kicking at a stray leaf, "if they decide to burn it, at least it'll be spectacular." "That's not helping," I said. Wasn't trying to. We lapsed into silence again. Gloom Harbor's bells tolled the change of watch at the docks. Somewhere below the courtyard, in the deep rooms of the Institute, the nameless choir stirred. They weren't asleep. Just waiting. "You know," I said slowly, "if they do shut it down, that doesn't make what you did meaningless." Arya snorted. "If they shut it down, it makes what I did a very long ethics essay." "It proved something," I said, "that we can't keep pretending the dead are just neutral matter. They're not. Not here. Not anymore." She looked at me sideways. You say that like you believe it's a good thing. I think, I said carefully, it's a true thing. Those are rare enough to be worth keeping, even when they're uncomfortable. Her mouth twitched. You're getting better at this. At what? Living with the idea that the world isn't under control, she said. Mine or yours? Before I could answer, the door behind us opened with an old, tired creak. Dean Hale stepped out, coat buttoned to his throat. Blackwood followed, expression unreadable. We stood. Well? Arya asked. Hale studied us for a long moment, as if weighing not just what we'd built, but who we'd become doing it. Your project is approved, he said at last. With conditions. Breath returned to my lungs in a rush. Arya didn't move. Conditions, she repeated. The prototype will be secured in a restricted archive, Hale said. Access only with council authorization. Any replication of the design will be subject to oversight by this institute and the ministry. For now, its use will be limited to controlled trials in emergency settings. Arya swallowed. So it lives? Hale's mouth twisted. As much as it ever did. Blackwood stepped forward, softer around the eyes than I'd ever seen him. Your grades, he said, are the least interesting part of this, but you'll be pleased to know they are excellent. He hesitated, then added, So are the number of people in that hall who asked me at intermission how soon something like that could be made standard issue. Standard? I started. For medics, he said. For rescue teams. For the poor sods who hang from the rigging in storm season. Change comes slowly, but it is looking at you now. Arya exhaled a laugh that sounded suspiciously like a sob. That's good. It's also terrifying, Blackwood said. That's how you know it's worth the trouble. Hale nodded once. Go home. Sleep. Try being students again for a few weeks before you attempt to rewrite another corner of our reality. They left us alone with the fog and the distant gulls. That night, I couldn't resist. Lab 7's door recognized my ID with a tired beep. Inside, the lights rose slowly, revealing the empty stands, the stained work tables, the ghost of old experiments in the air. At the far end, behind a new set of iron bars, stood the armor. They hadn't tried to disguise what it was. No tarp, no sheet. It watched me with all the faceless patience of a gallows. I stepped closer until my fingers wrapped around the bars. Congratulations, I said softly. You're an institutional asset now. The silence that followed was not quite empty. Then, featherlight against my mind, the choir spoke. Not as a roar, not as a crowd, but as something like a breath drawn through many throats at once. We will wait, they said. We will be ready. When they fall, when they burn, when the water closes over their heads, you will remember us. A shiver walked down my spine. I'll try, I said. You already do, they answered. We are in your bones now, too. In the reflection on the barred glass, I saw myself, tired, pale, standing alone. Behind my shoulders, for just a moment, the silhouettes of others stood as well, dozens of them, indistinct, shoulder to shoulder, facing the same direction I was, not reaching anymore, just standing, guarding. I blinked and the reflection was only me again. On my way out, I passed the morgue door. A toe tag had fallen from someone's careless hand, lying face up on the floor. No name, donor, archived. Somebody, I suspected Arya, had added a single line in pencil beneath. Not forgotten. I picked it up, hung it back on the nearest drawer handle. Good night, I told whoever was inside, to the bones under the institute, to the armor behind bars, to the city that kept feeding both. The pipes groaned overhead. The floor was cold under my feet. Somewhere below, the nameless choir murmured, almost content. We will stand. When you let us. I walked back to my room, already dreading next semester's schedule. Advanced propulsion, plasma containment. And if Arya Cole had anything to say about it, an entirely new set of lines we weren't supposed to cross. I knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be boring.